That brings us to the 8th premise of the book. The needs of the natural world are more important than the needs of the economic system. The needs of the natural world are more important than the needs of the economic system. Thanks. I have just guaranteed I will never hold public office. Another way to put the 8th premise is, any economic or social system that doesn't benefit the natural communities on which it's based is unsustainable, immoral, and really stupid. Sustainability, morality, and intelligence, as well as justice, requires the dismantling of any such economic or social system, or at the very least disallowing it from damaging your land base. Okay, 9th premise. Oh, the 9th premise is pretty interesting. Actually, I'm getting kind of cold. It's pretty interesting. You know, I can bash almost anything I want, and people are cool with it. You know, I can bash capitalism, that's fine. I can bash environmentalism, that's fine. I can bash anarcho-primitivism, that's fine. I can bash myself, that's fine. I can bash blah, 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 it's fine. But there's a few things that you like, cannot bash. For example, if I bash, oh my God, when I bash science, I can just feel the sphincters in the audience start to quiver. Or also, if I bash Buddhism, oh my God, it's like you have not lived until you've been chased down the street by a bunch of pacifists. Or another one that's really hard to talk about is population, and because if you mention that there are more humans on the planet than the planet can support, then people suddenly start to presume that you're actually anti-human, which doesn't really follow in my mind. Oh, it's great too, I gotta tell you this, that you know, they say there's no such thing as a stupid question. I got one the other day. And so I'm gonna like tell everybody in the country. There's this, I sometimes do interviews on a radio station south, one county, down in Humboldt County, county south of where I live. And there's this guy who hates me and hates what I say so much that every time I'm on there, he calls up, and I'm not sure, I think he attacks me, but I usually can't figure out what the hell he's saying. And one time I was saying that humans have exceeded carrying capacity, and carrying capacity is the number of any given species who could live in a particular place forever without harming it. So you could have an island that has a carrying capacity of 1,000 deer. 1,000 deer could live there forever. But if you put 10,000 deer there, they're going to eat too much of the vegetation, cause erosion, and lower the carrying capacity, make it so the place can only support 500 deer. Anyway, so I was saying that humans have exceeded carrying capacity. And he called up just sputtering, and he said, "How dare you say that humans have exceeded their capacity to care?" Which may or may not be the case, but that's a different question. Anyway, so the 9th premise is basically, although there will clearly someday be far fewer humans than there are at present, there are many ways this reduction in population could occur. Some of those ways would be characterized by extreme violence and privation. Nuclear Armageddon, for example, would certainly reduce both population and consumption, yet would do so horrifically. The same would be true for a continuation of overshoot followed by crash. Other ways would be characterized by less violence. You know, and I don't know what is going to happen, obviously, but this much I do know, that if we don't approach these problems actively, if we don't talk about our predicament and what we're going to do about it, the violence will be almost undoubtedly be more severe, the privation more extreme. And I want to be really clear. Every cell in my body wants for us to have a voluntary transformation. Just like every cell in my body wants for, that must be the tow truck. Just like every cell in my body wants for people to approach the whole question of there being too many humans, and I'm going to talk more about population in a second. But anyway, every cell in my body wants for us to approach that just reasonably and rationally and intelligently. But of course, we all know what we're going to do is just continue on this freight train to hell until it continues to fly off the cliff. Okay, so anyway, having said that, I need to say, by the way, that I don't think that population is actually, yes, there are more humans than the planet can support, but I don't think the population is a primary problem. I think population is actually a tertiary problem. The reason I think population is secondary instead of primary is that I think consumption is way more important. Because actual numbers don't matter. There could be 100 gazillion people on the planet, and if they didn't eat, shit, or stand anywhere, it wouldn't matter. The important thing is how much damage you're causing or how much help you're doing. Imagine that also, that humans can actually benefit their land base. What a strange concept that is. Anyway, and that's really important because when I think about overpopulation, the first image that comes to mind is, honestly, is a little brown baby with a distended belly in a third world nation. First image that comes to mind. When I think of overconsumption, the first thing I think of is an American. And who causes more damage? So that's why I don't think the population is a primary problem, but a secondary problem. And the reason I don't think the population is a secondary problem, but is actually a tertiary problem, is because, are there any demographers in here? Good, I hate demographers. And the reason I hate demographers is because sometimes they talk about something called the natural rate of population growth, which is that if you have X number of people, then the population exponentially rises, blah, blah, blah. And it presumes that people breed like rabbits. And the truth is, I don't even think rabbits breed like rabbits. It presumes that people don't make rational family planning decisions based upon their personal and social circumstances. Once again, the Tala lived there for 12,500 years in relatively steady state. And part of the reason is because they had an intimate relationship with their land base, and they would perceive damage to the land base as damage. And if perhaps they start to have too many babies, well, let's cut back. And you would think, let's just think about this. What happens if you have a culture where somebody writes a book, and in this book they tell people to go forth and multiply, and this book becomes a really big bestseller? That's going to affect family planning decisions. And also, I need to say this too, that there were, in native North America, there were about 250 different plants that were used as contraceptives and abortifactants by the women. And the decisions to use those were made by women. Bunch of fucking primitives. And yeah, imagine that. And I gotta tell you the story too, this is so cool, is back at one point, a bunch of male anthropologists went out, and anthropologists like exclusively male at one point, and a bunch of anthropologists went out and they were trying to find out what indigenous peoples would use for contraceptive. And they would go talk to the men, because of course the men are the only ones we're talking to, and they'd say, so how do you not make babies? And they're like, that is a really good question. And so a lot of the anthropologists were saying, indigenous people don't know where babies come from. And then when women started getting into anthropology, the women would go talk to the indigenous peoples, and they would talk to the women, and they would say, how do you not get pregnant? And the women say, oh, if you take this certain route when you're 16, then you're sterile for 5 years, and when then when you're 20, then you have to do this and this. And the men are like, really? I had no idea. I want to say one more thing about population, which is that the whole thing about making a wall down in Mexico, or down at the border of Mexico, and how we need to stop all those Mexicans from coming up, and the Central Americans, and the El Guatemalans, and the Nicaragüens, or whatever their names are. I have to say that I am actually strongly in favor of closing the border to Mexico on one condition, which is that if you close it to people, you close it to the movement of resources as well.